What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Fantasy Files. It's just me today, Spencer, and I'm going to be talking about why you should read the Red Rising series. I've only read the first trilogy, so that's what I'll be covering in this video. But before I get started, it would really help us out a lot if you would hit those like and subscribe buttons down below and ring the little bell icon to get notified when we drop new content. We're trying to hit 500 subs in the next 6 months, which is really where I think the audience starts snowballing and growing. And it seems to be when the algorithm really starts to recommend your videos to viewers. So we need your help with that. Also, you can follow us on Twitter at Files Fantasy to keep up with all of our shenanigans and immediate reactions to the books we read that sometimes aren't covered on this channel. So if you want to see what else we read, like off air, then definitely check that out. This will be a spoiler-free discussion or review. I'm just going to go through why I picked these up and then tell you why you need to move these up your TBR. So let's begin with how I started these books and why I picked them up. So for a long time, I had heard mixed things. I knew there was a lot of people that really liked these books, and there was some other people who were not necessarily like hating on it, but they had very mixed opinions on it. And I'll get into that in a little bit too. But then the thing that kind of put the final nail in the coffin for me was our third co-host, Chris. He had mentioned that he had started these and he was like, trust me, you really don't want to read them. And most of his complaints were about the main character. And so I was like, okay, well, if the main character is bad and you didn't enjoy these, then like I doubt I would, because we have really similar taste in books. And so I put it off for a long time, and I was like, I'll probably never read them, honestly. Like I have so many other books to read. Like, when would I ever decide to pick up something that just doesn't sound that fun to me? But then there was this sale on Audible, and it was a few weeks ago, and everything was like 75 to 85% off. It was absolutely crazy. And I found the first Red Rising book for $3. And now I really wish that I had picked up the all the other ones in the series, because they were like the same price. And so, I saw this for $3 and I was like, you know what? For $3, I can give it a chance. I'll listen to the first couple hours, and if I don't like it after that, then I'll just set it down and whatever. It's $3. So I picked that up, and it sat in my library for the past few weeks. And then we were doing our Night Angel series of videos, and I needed something to read in between those. And I was going to pick up one of the Expanse books, but then I realized, oh yeah, I have Red Rising in my library. And so I decided to start that one. And I got about maybe 2 or 2.5 hours in, and I was trying to decide if I wanted to DNF it or not, because it was moving really slowly. I really didn't mind the main character that much. But it was just kind of like, okay, like what's going to happen? Can we get this rolling? But then probably 40% of the way through, 40%, something big happens. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. And what really got me hooked was just kind of the way this whole society all across the solar system, just the way that they have like this hierarchy. And I wanted to know, like, how did it get this way? Like, what are they going to do about this? Like, what does this mean in the grand scheme of things? Like, why does everything work this way? And so those questions really kept me just kind of pushing through that first book. And by the time I was like 50% of the way through the book, I was like truly enjoying it, not just trying to push through to read it. I was really enjoying it. But then I got to the end of that one, and the way it ended, I was like, okay, like I don't know where this is going, but it's very intriguing. And there was a couple characters in particular that I wanted to know like where they ended up. And so I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'll pick up the second book. So we did our Night Angel videos, and then I picked up the second book not too long ago. Um, and I was just absolutely hooked from there. I was like, this is I'll get into my final verdict on those books. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. The second book just took off. It went in a completely different direction than the first book. The first was already good, but the second just brought it to such an insane level of enjoyment. And it was just written really well. And so by the end of the second book, I was like, okay, I have to read the third book. And the third book did not disappoint. And yeah, I just fell like absolutely hopelessly in love with this series. I'm super excited to go on to the next ones. Not sure if I'll do that right away. I think I need to read some fantasy in between going on to the next ones, because I know that they do kind of shake things up a little bit. And so, you know, I'm gonna kind of drift on my enjoyment of these past three books for a while, and then I'll come back to it maybe in a month or so. So that's why I enjoyed it. Let's talk about what the series is actually about. So we follow Darrow, our main character, Darrow, in this world. It's written in first person, so everything is from his point of view. And he is something called a red. In this class system that we have, there are all these different colors, and he is a red. And in order to understand what that means, I'm going to go through kind of what this society is and the way that they live and the way this whole thing is structured. So all of these, the different colors of this society are all human. They're not like any alien species or anything. Not really. There's some like enhancements and stuff depending on what color you are. But basically, golds are at the top, and they are the rulers of this society. Under them are the silvers, and they're kind of the financial and businessmen kind of people. The whites are like your clergy, your priests, and judges. And then coppers are basically all of their administrators, lawyers, and bureaucrats. And those are what are known as the high colors. Then we go into the mid colors, which are blues, yellows, greens, violets, orange, and gray. And basically, blues are kind of your starship captains and pilots. Yellows are your doctors and other healers. Greens are your programmers and technician, your techies. And then violets are your, I guess, kind of like painters and creative types. Oranges are your mechanics and engineers. And grays are kind of your everyday soldiers and police. Then we get to the low colors, which is where Darrow is. And we start with the browns kind of at the top of the low colors. And they are the, like your basic servants, your cooks, janitors, stuff like that. Obsidians, which are probably the most alien of all of the humans. They're just like bioengineered to be like huge and hulking. And they are basically the elite soldiers and bodyguards. And then we have the pinks, which are essentially the courtesans of this world. They're known as like pleasure slaves. I'm sure you can imagine what that means. And they also kind of serve as social functionaries, that kind of thing. And then we get to the very bottom of everything, which is where Darrow is. And those are the reds. and they are manual laborers and miners. And Darrow is a miner terraformer, kind of. That's kind of his job, but he's like the best at it. He's like the very best like miner. So like I said, Darrow is a red who terraforms the planet of Mars for the advancement of the golds. They are told that their station in life is highly honored, that Earth's atmosphere is crumbling, and that it's up to them to get Mars ready for the people of Earth who desperately need their help. And so I found this super interesting because it gives the Reds a real sense of purpose, where they actually believe they're doing a good thing for the rest of humanity, to get these people off of Earth who are dying, so that they can come to Mars. Like they're hailed as like this like big like respected position, but they just don't know like what's actually going on outside their little world, because in reality they are just making the land more livable for the ruling class, the Golds, and mining resources for them. So it has nothing to do with Earth. It's all for the Golds who want to live on Mars and live in luxury, etc. And so Darrow has a wife named Io, who is trying to tell him that the Golds are lying to them and that their society isn't what it seems. But he doesn't believe her. He's kind of naive, and he kind of buys into this whole idea that, you know, they're doing this great thing for humanity. And so he's pretty innocent at this point in the story. She tells him that she wants him to live for more than the scraps of life that the gold give them. And that is a very important phrase that gets, you know, brought out through the rest of the series. The two of them get caught for sneaking out of their village to see how the Golds live in absurd luxury and the beautiful planet that is outside their dusty landscape. Like they just live in like this very, like what you would expect of Mars, just this very desolate kind of place. But they get caught by the Golds and they get put on trial. And when they are on trial, Io, Darrow's wife, she believes in like this whole rebellion. She's like, we need to take down the Golds. And so she sings this forbidden song called the Song of Persephone's, a song of revolution and uprising, and tells the crowd to break the chains, which is another big thing that gets carried throughout the series. Break the chains. And so after they hang her, Darrow decides to commit suicide, but is saved from his own destruction and brought into the Sons of Ares, which is I guess, kind of a secret rebellion, an uprising bent on taking down the gold hierarchy. And this is really where the story kind of takes off, basically. Without giving too much away, Darrow has to infiltrate the Golds and take down their class system from within. And it ends up leading to a very, I guess, Hunger Games or Ender's Game type thing that happens about halfway through, which is where you get all of those Hunger Games comparisons. Now, none of that is really spoilers. It all happens in the first, I don't know, 2 or 3 chapters of the book, I think. And so the real story doesn't really happen until all of that stuff does. But I want to be super clear. This is not a ripoff of the Hunger Games in any way. Those comparisons are certainly there for a reason, but this is adult sci-fi. This is not YA in any way. I always thought it was, but once I started reading it, I could not believe how wrong I was. And by the time the second book comes around, then we get more into the like Game of Thrones in space kind of vibe, with more political maneuverings and an even darker tone overall. And we get really far away from the Hunger Games comparisons. Like all the people that say that, like it's like a fraction of the first book when that comes into play. And so our our third co-host, Chris, I found out later that I don't think he even made it to the point where Darrow's wife died, or maybe he got to like right around that point and gave up. Like, if you're about to read Red Rising, please get past that point. Like, get much farther than that, because it gets exponentially better as the story goes on. The first 30% probably does have some pacing issues, but it certainly gets much better. So just hang in there. So now that all that's out of the way, let's talk about why you should read Red Rising. First off, did you like the Hunger Games and other dystopian novels back in the day, but wish there was something like that for older audiences? Because this is the obvious evolution of those books. Even when it gets rid of the whole Hunger Games kind of scenario that goes on in the first book, there's still like everything is still a dystopia, but it doesn't feel like the really cliche dystopias that we get in some of those books. It feels very well realized and very adult, and it just seems like something that's more real than kind of the parody of what we've come to know as dystopian. But yeah, you won't find any of those YA dystopian typical tropes that you would normally find in this book or in this series. It's very much been aged up for people who grew up reading those books, and it is far more complex and engaging than anything the Hunger Games or Divergent ever did. Also, do you like Game of Thrones? Do you like The Expanse? And do you like Star Trek? Especially starting at the second book, this is a perfect combination of all three of those things. It's like Game of Thrones was having sex with The Expanse, but it was also seeing Star Trek on the side, so nobody really knows whose baby it is. It brings the bleakness and semi-grimdark nature and political maneuverings of Game of Thrones, the sci-fi action and camaraderie of The Expanse, and the various worlds and hard sci-fi tech of Star Trek, and combines it all together to make what I think is a perfect sci-fi series. And honestly, this trilogy might be better than The Expanse for me. I know, last year I was talking about The Expanse a lot. I really liked it, and I do really like The Expanse. But honestly, this one just really takes the cake for me. So like I said, a common complaint I see a lot in reviews is the main character, Darrow. But those are from people who didn't make it all the way through the book. I guarantee it. Darrow is a character who starts out weak and spineless and just wants to enjoy the simplest things in life and bow down to his golden overlords. But Darrow, little by little, loses that innocence. He loses that naivete. And after horrible thing after horrible thing happens to him, he becomes one of my favorite characters I've ever read, I think. Without spoiling too much, he becomes a ruthless yet fair warlord who believes in the goodness of humankind, believes that even the coldest of golds can be redeemed, and wants so badly to save them from their own destruction. Even when he is betrayed time and time again, he knows that if he can just get through to them, he can strike their hearts and help them to see the damage that has been inflicted by their people to all of these other colors. The cool thing about Darrow's character arc and our relation to it is that as Darrow loses his innocence, we also lose ours. Because everything is from the first person perspective. And so we see Darrow's reasonings behind things, and we get sucked into it just when Darrow believes he has a friend he can trust, as do we. he gets betrayed, as do we. And so, like, we feel that viscerally. And it makes us and Darrow a little colder, a little more wary to trust people, and sometimes a little wiser for it. Speaking of Darrow's friends, this is where the camaraderie and that found family feeling of the Expanse comes into play. By the time the halfway point of the second book comes around, we really feel like we have this tight knit group who will do anything for each other. Some more than others, but some of Darrow's crew are so amazing. They are so awesome. Severo by far is my favorite. And I think that if this ever gets a movie or show adaptation, he should absolutely be played by Ewan Rion, who played Ramsay Bolton in Game of Thrones. I know him as Simon from Misfits. It's just too perfect. He would be the perfect actor for that character. But by the end of the third book, we have like a real family of people who would do anything for each other. And it's really, really amazing how well the author wrote these characters and their relationships. All of the relationships feel absolutely real. They're not perfect in any way. Even the best of friends have, you know, these fights and quarrels and, you know, betrayals and all these little things that happen that make them feel very real. And I think that is something that Pierce Brown does really, really well. Speaking of relationships, there is a romantic subplot in these books, but I felt like it was pretty shallow but good. It's just kind of in the background a lot. I think it might have been pushed aside to make room for the other relationships taking place in the books, to make sure that they kind of had center stage, because they really, really matter to the story. It makes sense that the romance isn't first and foremost, since there's so much like end of the world type stuff happening. And although there is some time for it, the characters definitely have more pressing things to worry about once the ball really gets rolling. So another thing I really loved about these books is the technology. In the first book, during the Hunger Games type thing we have going on, the characters are extremely lucky to find like a rusted iron sword to defend themselves with. And when they get that, you feel like they've just upgraded a lot. And each book really expands what technology they get their hands on as they kind of claim more and more power and have more opportunities at their fingertips. And by the end, we're talking about like, you know, so we went from like iron swords to that at the end of the trilogy is like nuclear warfare. So there's like huge upgrades as they go along. It's awesome. But there are a lot of really, really cool gadgets. My favorite being the razor, which is essentially a sword, but it can take any shape at the will of the user. When it's just resting, it's just kind of like coiled up around their wrist. Like, remember those sharp pieces of metal we were somehow allowed to have as kids, where you would just like slap it against your wrist and it would become a bracelet? It's kind of like that. It made me think of those. But at a thought from the wielder, it can extend into like a sword, or it can become like a curved, like scythe looking weapon, or it can be used as a whip, just like this big metal. Like imagine if a sword was completely like limp and you could just like fling it around. It's kind of like that too. Also, the hollow boots that you can basically fly around in were awesome. And there's a ton of cool pieces of armor like that, and weapons and things. So I don't want to give too much away because they're really fun to discover and kind of see how they work and stuff. But trust me, all of the tech in these books is really, really awesome. So let's talk about the story itself. These books have a rock solid pacing throughout the entirety of the trilogy, besides maybe the first 30% of the first book. But honestly, I really didn't mind it too much. I can see why people don't, but it really wasn't that bad for me, I feel like. And now that I've read through all three books, I really want to revisit that first 30% to see what I may have kind of glazed over. If you're the kind of person that likes a lot of extremely shocking twists and betrayals, I literally could not think of a better series for you. This had some of the most shocking moments I've ever experienced. And the third book has, I think, the biggest twist I've ever read, next to the big twist in The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward, because that one took me really off guard. This is borderline grimdark, where everything at every turn just seems so hopeless. Yet there's these moments that make you believe that this really could all work out in the end. And some of the decisions made by high color characters can give you a huge sense of hope for their world. There is extremely brutal action, as well as lots of swearing and stuff like that. So if that's something that you don't like, then maybe this isn't the series for you. But if you do like that stuff, there's plenty of here for you to enjoy. Also, I really liked how, even though it's in first person, Darrow is infiltrating the gold. So he sees everything from their perspective as well. And not always, but sometimes you really get to see and understand their point of view and how they got this society to be the way it is and how they got to like their way of thinking. And even though they're going about it in the wrong way, it's hard to discount their point of view on certain things. There are simply hard truths to this world and compromises that have to be made because this is a very brutal world and there's just certain things that you can't really get around. So I really liked how the story wasn't just a one-sided rebellion story. It was really about the high colors and the low colors fighting, but also coming to certain compromises, if that makes sense. There are certain there's just certain things that they're going to be at an impasse on, which is really, really cool. So talking about emotional moments, man, there is a healthy amount of them, especially in the third book. In the first two books, there weren't too many that made me straight up choke up and shed a tear or anything. But in the third book, I felt like I was choking up throughout the whole book, whether it was a favorite character dying or a tender moment between friends or lovers or an especially emotionally difficult betrayal. I was at work, and thankfully I was working alone because I definitely cried my way through that last book a bit. It's very heartbreaking at some points, and also sometimes very hopeful. You know, sometimes you just kind of shed a tear because it's such a good moment, because it's, you know, because you're enjoying it, but also it's hopeful and fulfilling. And lastly, just the way that this society is explored. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's complicated, but not in a way where you're not going to understand what's going on. But it's not black and white like some of the younger dystopian novels, like I mentioned. There's a lot of shifting alliances and people realizing that they're on the wrong side of the war, whichever way that may be, whether it's good side going to the bad side or bad side going to the good side. And it just feels very real and organic. It's not it's not like a parody of the genre like some of those other books feel like. And I just think that Pierce Brown did such a good job with the world building. I mean, everything else is amazing, but the world building specifically is so good, and it's what really, really sold me on this series. All right, so final thoughts for these books. So this series took me by complete surprise. I really didn't think that I was going to enjoy it, like I mentioned. And I felt like such a complete fool after getting into the second book. I was like, how could I have ever thought that this series like sucked or that I wouldn't enjoy it? I really cannot wait for Chris and Gabe to read these books so that we can talk about them in depth. Chris especially, I've been texting him saying, dude, you were so wrong. Like these are his book. Like he is going to love these books. Like these are exactly like his style of books. So I'm really, really eager for him to get back into them. I've just finished the third book yesterday, and I already feel like I want to reread them just immediately. And you know that's how good they are. They left such a major impression, that I just want to spend more time with these books, and I'm actually nervous to go on to the next ones because I'm like, I loved this trilogy so much. I'm like, I hope the next two don't like ruin it, but I don't think they will. I think they're going to be great. If you're going to start these, please just do me a personal favor and do not DNF the first book. The book, like I said, really opens up about 35-40% of the way in. But even then, the first book is nothing compared to the second. The second and third books are probably just simply two of the best single books I have ever read, honestly. So the first book will be enjoyable, but please don't stop there if you felt like kind of mediocre about it, because it jumps leagues ahead in the next two. I think the third book, Morning Star, might be my favorite book of the year right now. It's kind of tied with Thomas Howard Riley's We Break Immortals and Holly Tinsley's Hand That Cast the Bone. But we also have the new King's Dark Tidings books coming out later this year. So we'll have to see. That might bump somebody off the top three. But definitely try these books out. I hope I've convinced you to read them. Just don't listen to some of the negative feedback that's out there, because I would honestly bet money that most of those people really didn't read much of the first book before giving up, because this trilogy is really something special, and it's one of those series that really only comes around once in a lifetime. So I really, really hope you enjoy them, guys. All right, well, that's going to wrap us up there. Thank you so much for listening to me gush about the Red Rising trilogy. I will at some point read the next two, but I think I just need my heart to settle down a little after reading the ending of Morning Star. Maybe I'll even wait until the sixth book has a release date. I don't know. We'll have to see. I'll probably end up reading it just in the next month or something. What did you guys think of the first trilogy? Leave a comment down below or reach out to us on Twitter at Files Fantasy and let us know. Be sure to hit all of the buttons and the bells down below to get notified when we put out new content. Until next time, in the words of EO, break the chains and live for more.